Right when I got Powell's debrief on I forget which one it was. I think it was the second meeting out at Crawford, Texas, with Blair there. I looked at Powell and I said, "What's the difference between Clinton and Blair?" he said, "Well, in terms of these issues, there is no difference. they're locked in with each other." And I think you're right. Blair determined that that's where I give him credit and say that's where Britain's bread is buttered. So I'm going to apply the butter and buy the bread. And more and more, when he came out with that statement about 45 minutes, Powell came into my office that day and he said, "Turn on the television." I hit the remote and we were always on CNN commercial there. Not anymore, but, and they were repeating it. Blair was talking about in 45 minutes, we could have missiles hitting London or something like that. And Powell looked at me and said, "Where the devil did he get that?" And I said, "Funny you should ask, boss. I just received this from London, and it's an unclassified packet, and it asserts not only that, but a lot of other things that I don't even think George Tenet or John McLaughlin out at Langley would assert. In fact, I say we pass this out there to them and see what they think about it." It was an unclassified public diplomacy document, propaganda document, focused on going to war with Iraq. And it was just pedantry. I mean, there was no intelligence in it. It was these hyperbolic statements like that, like, missiles could hit London in 45 minutes or whatever. And that's when I think I concluded completely Blair is as much an advocate, if not more an advocate for this conflict as my boss, and my boss being the president, Bush. I don't think Powell was ever really sucked into that kind of support. He knew what it would mean for the U.S. military if we had to put boots on the ground in the region extensively. And he knew that would have to be the case if we took Saddam out, because then there was no balancer in the Gulf region for the Iranians. Saddam might not have done it as well as we would like, but he did it nonetheless. And so he was opposed to it in that sense, but at the same time, he went along with it reluctantly. Fought the presentation at the UN the whole time, right up to the dress rehearsal in the cafeteria of the U.S. UN mission building in New York, top floor cafeteria. We bought the whole cafeteria literally and had a dress rehearsal there the night before. And he was fighting it even then. I remember a very acerbic remark he made to John McLaughlin, who interrupted me. He had said at the beginning, "I must get the timing down. Don't anyone interrupt me. If you have any comments," and that includes you, George, he said, looking at Tenet, "keep them to the end." Well, about 15 minutes before he had finished, McLaughlin interrupted him. And, oh, God, he fixed John with a stare that could have killed. And McLaughlin realized, uh-oh. But he was frustrated even then. And he was frustrated on the floor of the UN Security Council, though he didn't show it too much.
Yeah. I saw the intelligence dossier. I think I probably mentioned this to you before. Because I was head of the Indonesia department at the time, and because of it, the size of its Muslim population, they brought me in to kind of have another kind of look at the intelligence dossier. And then this was before it was famously sexed up by the communications director, number 10, Alistair, Campbell, who then became the author of all of these kind of ridiculous statements where, we just had to prove, some sort of causal link, and hence the 45 minutes and the anthrax and all these other kind of problems that emerged. And we've been a slave to that propaganda machine ever since, even today. And I think we kind of, propaganda now trumps actual diplomacy, it seems to me.
Have you ever read Knightley's book, The Second Oldest Profession?
I haven't, but I will.
It is a tremendously delicious and probably at least 90% accurate takedown of the intelligence community's from roughly the beginning of the 19th century forward, but particularly focusing on the 20th century. SIS, SOE, all those esoteric organizations, for example, that Churchill just loved. It essentially is it says if they did any good at all, it was by accident. And some of those accidents were people like those that turned for the Soviet Union early on against Britain because of the way they did it and the reasons they did it. I mean, it's just a complete reversal of what you might say would be a hagiographic assessment of, all the different intelligence communities in the world that matter, CIA and Britain principally. But it's also Germany, it's also France, it's also the other countries majorly involved, certainly in World War I, World War II, and then the Cold War, with Russia maybe coming out for various reasons, not always intended by them, a little bit better from the GRU to the NKVD, but not much better. But in essence, it's a condemnation of all this crap, and especially as it builds itself into bureaucratic nonsense and saving itself by lying all the time as we go into the world wars and then into the Cold War, when we're lying 24 hours a day virtually in order to keep everything copacetic with regard to not only their existence and money, but also the conglomerate around them, the national security state, I would call it in our country. And SIS and others, SOE, the names now, whatever they are, GCHQ, all these different, they're all the same. They're all working for their own preservation, and they will lie endlessly to achieve that purpose. I think Knightley's right. Boy, does he offer proof.
Well, it's a point that I make about NATO all the time, and the EU and SIS. For many people know, but SIS is the Secret Intelligence Service, what people commonly know as MI6, but actually people who work there always refer to it as SIS. They are bureaucracies. You're right. You're exactly right. I was thinking the same thing as you were talking, that they are bureaucracies. They need enemies to justify their resources. And I think it's 2015 in the UK, certainly a year after the Ukraine crisis started, our intelligence agencies saw a big increase in funding, so they could massively increase their staffing. Well, if the Russia threat went away, then they'd get less money and they'd have to reduce their staffing. And yep. Anybody who's worked in any bureaucracy knows that, they're easy to set up. They're harder to kind of break down, yep. Once they're established. They often get bigger, they seldom get smaller. And so, you need the enemy to kind of justify the people going out. And when it comes down to it, I mean, it's setting aside the kind of offensive work as opposed to the pure intelligence work. Intelligence gathering is just about information, getting access to information, so that you can create policy, foreign policy, defense policy, and so on. These days, mostly you can get that online through AI. And do you really need, so much snooping on people to get the information? I'm not entirely sure that you do, but I mean, they need to feel that what they write is groundbreaking, earth-shattering, life-changing, epoch-defining.
Yeah.
So that when people read it, they say, wow, put more money into that. Russia's going to invade Estonia next week, or, whatever it may be. Iran is going to launch hypersonic missiles at the Canary Wharf in 45 minutes, or whatever it may be, right?
Well, that reminds me, one of the most incredible things he describes in there is the several times that Stalin got essentially the war plans of the Wehrmacht and a good assessment of the timing. And he wouldn't believe it. Especially after the pact had been achieved, he wouldn't believe it. And so the people in the GRU and NKVD basically said, well, the boss doesn't like this, so we're not going to give him any more.
Well, sometimes that's the other thing about intelligence. Sometimes people say stuff to you that they want you to hear, even if it's untrue.
Yeah.
Like when I was wandering around the embassy in Moscow, outside of the classified safe speech rooms, and so on, in the dirty space, which is basically most of the building, I'll be talking about all sorts of rubbish.
Yeah.
It was completely false, assuming that people will be listening into it, right? Because that's all part of the game too. And
that reminds me, Powell comes into me one day. I don't remember. I think it was probably '02. It was right after I become chief of staff, so it was probably the fall of '02. And he says, "We have a leak in Beijing, and I'm told it's bad." And I said something like, "Mr. Tennant give you that?" And he said, "Well, George is worried about it. There's no question about it. And so is John McLaughlin, his deputy. What do you suggest?" And I said, "Well, there is a really, really good team in Texas." And I described it to him and what their purpose was. And I'd had some slight contact with them with the North Korea file. They went around doing things for the U.S. government that were really difficult to do, and they were supremely expert in doing, one of which was to assess your SCIF facility, special compartmented information facility, which was in the heart of our embassy in Beijing, and so considered fairly safe, because not only was it a SCIF with all the lead lining and all that kind of stuff, but it was also in the heart of our embassy in Beijing. So you had a lot of concrete to get through it. Yeah. She went over there, this young lady who was quite striking, a Texan, and she was one of their best people. I remember vividly when she came back, she came in to see me before she went in to see the secretary, and she said, "You're leaking like a sieve." I said, kind of, tongue in cheek, I said, "Let me think about that for a minute. I might be able to use that, and I might not want it corrected." And she said, "No, I think you want this corrected." So, yeah, she went in and briefed Powell, and we sent a whole team over there to, make it safer. But, you never make it totally safe. And,
No, you don't. You don't.